Good morning and welcome, dear friends. Dear friends, today in the CEC live lecture session, we are going with the English literature series, and that is 20th Century World Literature series. In this series, today's topic for discussion is Chi, the Motorcycle Diaries. And to discuss this topic within studios with us, we have Dr. Anand Prakash. Dr. Prakash is an eminent English faculty. He is retired professor from DU. Friends, regarding this topic, if you have any questions and queries, you can call us on our toll free number, that is 1800 Without wasting much time, I would request Dr. Prakash to continue with the lecture. Welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Seema, and welcome viewers. Today's topic, as has been announced by Dr. Seema, is Che, the Motorcycle Diaries. And all of us have heard of Che in the 20th century, and still his name, resounds in the political world. And because we are discussing these days Latin American writing, so Che's influence as a thinker and as a writer also is immense. And therefore, we thought that some discussion should happen about his writing, one important writing, that is the Motorcycle Diaries. It also will bring into focus the kind of reality that the Latin American writer confronts. It's a difficult reality, it's a problematic reality, it's a reality that challenges all kinds of genius, all kinds of creativity. And if there is an angle that we have from political leader and an idealist and a thinker, then that, I'm sure, will enrich our understanding about the writing. So let me initially tell you a few general things about Che the person, his engagements, and then the circumstances in which he wrote this diary. And then we'll also discuss one or two more aspects connected with Che and Latin American writing. For instance, this particular one, this Motorcycle Diaries, is in the form of memoirs. And I'll go into the general theory of the memoirs. What are memoirs? What role do they play? How do they enlighten the cultural scene of a time when which they are about? So these questions might emerge in the explanations that I'll give here. Initially, let me tell you that this diaries book was published much later than Che's death. It was in the archives, and his daughter came upon this particular manuscript, and she read it and she found it immensely significant, and she thought that this should see the light of day, this should be published and should be made available for the reader at the world level. So this book called the Diaries, the Motorcycle Diaries, happened. These diaries, now I'm using the plural because he was writing on a daily basis. Entries, and therefore you'll have chapters here which are 1 page, 1.5 page, because that kind of time he has on that particular day, and this goes on, and this crosses a good 150 pages in the book. And the diaries were written between December 1951 and August 1952. That was the time when Che was just 23 years old. He was born in 1928. And the word Che, all of us are curious as to what it means, and this was a kind of endearing word in Argentina. So people would always call somebody, like here they say bacha, here they say jawan, here they say achhe wale, and all those things, good names. When you call somebody with that kind of affection, then that person in Argentina becomes Che. So he was called Che, but his name was Ernesto Guevara, let's call him. And then he was born in 1928, as I said, June 14 in Rosario, Argentina. He is not actually associated with Argentina as much as he is associated with Cuba, and that also is a kind of problem for us. Che is genuinely a writer of entire Latin America, all the countries. He represents the voice of the downtrodden, he represents the voice of the exploited in the entire region that is named Latin America. So it doesn't matter whether he was born in Argentina or Chile, or he was born in Cuba or wherever, because he belonged to the countries in their entirety. So his family moves from this Rosario to Alta Gracia, a spa town near Cordoba, which is also in Argentina. In 1948, when he is 20 years, he enrolls in medical school at the University of Buenos Aires, which is the capital town of Argentina, and which means that he professionally was a doctor. Initially, he wanted to go to become an engineer, but then he found that the profession of a doctor was more appealing for him, and this actually stood him in good stead, because he became available to the people in general at the level of a medical advisor. So if he went to a village, if he went to a small town and there were poor people and they didn't have the medical care, then this person would communicate with them at the level of the medical problems. So he does his medical degree in 1948, and then a few years later, a couple of years later, he thinks of visiting the entire region on his own. A young man of 23, a young man of 22, 23, this person decides to see the whole of Latin America on his own. So he has just a friend who is slightly senior to him, and he and his friend, they just get a bicycle from somewhere. In the book it is mentioned that it's a motorcycle only in the name, because this is a motorized cycle. So I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe there was a kind of motor that was fitted in the bicycle, or maybe there was a proper bike, and then they used it, and he chose this vehicle for him and his friend, and a small dog also. So all three of them, they started on this big campaign, the big journey, and since they will be covering the entire South America, and in fact they have also had plans to, and they executed it to also visit America, North America. Therefore, the distance would be between 3,000 and 4,000 miles, and they had to do it in 10 months, because the journey starts in 1951 and it finishes in 1952, and it is December 1951, which is the end of, which means that the journey actually starts in 52, and in October it comes to an end. So if that is the case, then in 10 months he would have to cover how many miles? 3,000 to 4,000 miles, whatever the distance, which means that every day they have to do more than 100 miles. 100 miles on this kind of a bicycle which is motorized, and a friend sitting at the back, and then there is a dog also. It's a stupendous task, and one wonders how Che performed it to his satisfaction. There was no ease in it, there was no comfort in it. They didn't have any booking anywhere. They would not stay, in a hotel, in a resort. That they would just stay wherever they reached. Sometimes they had to sleep outside in the open. Sometimes they didn't have things to cover themselves at night. And Argentina and Chile and Cuba and Colombia and all those places, they are very cold. So one wonders as to how these people bore with the kind of pressures that weather confronted them with. So in journey to different Latin American countries, at 23, Che returns in 1952 to Buenos Aires, to Argentina. Later he becomes a Cuban national in 1959. So these 7 years, what is he doing? That is of course not our concern today, but then since I am just sharing this information with you about his career, I would say that for these 7 years he was entirely grounded in the political reality of the continent, and he was trying to understand people, their problems. He would talk to them, he would mobilize them, he would induce them to take political action under his leadership or under somebody else's leadership. And he was the kind of leader who would not be easily located among the people. He would become one with them, and he identified them with them all the time. Which means that this person was a genuine leader, not a leader who is very visible and who is dictatorial and who tells people do this and I'll do that. No, not that kind of division of work. He would be a very human person. He would be a very close friend of everybody. In fact, during this journey through the Latin American countries. He once saw some leprosy patients in a village, and he stayed there for a few days. He moved around, he would sleep with them, he would work with them, and they were so happy to receive him that this was a kind of humanist who would not he would like Gandhiji much earlier. This person also would be very close to the leprosy patients, and towards the end they gave him a farewell, and they started dancing and they started playing on instruments. And some people who were playing on instruments, they didn't have fingers. Their fingers had been lost in the course of the disease that was spreading through their body. It's a very bad disease, all of us know about it. And so they had tied some little pins or little sticks at the end of their fingers, and they were playing those instruments with those sticks. So you can see the kind of affection this person was able to generate among people with whom he worked. And then he wrote about them in these diaries. On certain days, the motorcycle will break down. One day, the motorcycle jumped across some distance and was stuck in the middle of two rocks, and the two friends, they were just hanging without any support, and the dog would have fallen on one side, and Che was in fact more protective about the dog than about himself or his friend. So that kind of a person, and he then take care of the dog, take care of his friend, and he wouldn't have much money, so he would somehow manage and go across. Why was he doing it? Why was he on this kind of a journey? This question is raised in the context of his writing, and there he makes it very clear. He wants to understand people. He wants to understand their life. He wants to understand the problems that they face. He wants to identify the element of dreams in their hearts and minds. Because even when one is poor, one is illiterate, one is deprived, one has certain dreams, and dreaming is very human. And therefore, he would identify the dreams, and all of them wanted to change their fates, their lives, their destinies, and he would identify the dreams, and before identifying the dreams, he would prepare himself to understand what they were. So that seems to be the purpose of his diaries that he wrote, and he would write on a daily basis. And he would write, not just any flourish language with a flourish. He would just describe what he felt at the time, and that is the beauty of these diaries, because they have a different kind of quality of writing. This quality is very genuine. You can't say that he is conscious about language, conscious about choice of words. He uses whatever word occurs to him at the time he has a pen in hand. Imagine this kind of a writing. Say this to a writer today, and everybody will laugh and will say, this is not serious. We don't understand language, we use dictionaries, we discuss things and vocabulary and all those things. He would not bother about it. But when you read the diary, you realize that he is a very accomplished writer. He has the language and the languages under his command, and he can use them the way he likes. I don't have to give examples from the Indian writing, but there have been writers in India who have tremendous sense of vocabulary, and they were totally illiterate. But anyway, coming back to Che, he becomes a Cuban national in 1959. Why? Because he once again sees that the Cuban cause is the Argentinian cause, the Argentinian cause is the Latin American cause, and then the cause is that these people are very hardworking, and still they are crushed under the weight of what he called capitalism. So he would try to understand the working of capitalism in Latin America, and then he would tell people that capitalism is wrong, bad, and it should be replaced. And how it is to be replaced, that he would show not through words but through his example. That is, bring human beings together, get human beings into the action, make them work for their safety, for the safety of others, make them work for the good of the society as a whole. So he would say he was a person who would believe in socialism. Socialism means humanism. So socialism means working for the help of the downtrodden, the simple people. Give them basic facilities, give them shelter, give them medical help, give them education, give them a small job so that they can have dignity. So this kind of socialism he espoused, and that's why he became so popular. So he goes to different countries, including Congo in Africa later. So he became an international figure. People would invite him to talk. and he once spoke, as a representative of the Cuban government in UNO, and he was a household name for some time in the 20th century. Then, towards the end of his life, in 1966, he would be not even 40, he would be 38, born in 28, and he would then be he would go to Bolivia to once again on his mission. He was a minister in the government in Cuba, but then he would take leave from there and move to different places, and he would inspire people to work for the cause of humanity. And then he also went to Bolivia. There, he went in disguise because his life was in danger. All across the world was aware, that if this person is given a chance to appeal to the masses all over the world, then capitalism will get the biggest shock of its life. So there were people who were after him. Immediately after, they came to know that this person was active. So he went to Bolivia in disguise, and he was attacked in the guerrilla fight. He was wounded, captured, and the day he was captured, next day he was murdered. So this is the kind of life that this person lived. He died in harness. He died for the cause of revolution. He died for the cause of social change, and he was at that time not even 40. So at the age of 39, this person dies. Now, does it show in his diaries? This is the question, and let me give you an idea of the diaries as they are to appeal to alert readers. So I read the statement. The diaries recount the trials, vicissitudes, and tremendous adventure of a young man's journey of discovery through Latin America. Discovery is the word. He is on a discovery mission. He wants to see and explore, and he wants then to use that knowledge of exploration for the good of the masses. Ernesto began writing these diaries when, in December 1951, he set off with his friend Alberto Granado on their long-awaited trip from Buenos Aires down the Atlantic coast of Argentina, across the Pampa, through the Andes and into Chile, and from Chile northward to Peru and Colombia, and finally to Caracas. See the distance he has covered, and which means that he has come into contact with cultures, regions, specific realities, specific customs, literature, myths, legends, and in the difficult terrain. Where we here in India cannot imagine the kind of tough terrain that Latin America is. It's a very rocky place. Nothing grows there. There are forests, and the people are very hardy, and they sometimes are very ruthless. There is a lot of violence at that place because life is hard. So this person going around and understanding those people and earning their affection with his help is an example of achievement. So that's how he ends his journey. Finally, coming to Caracas. The reader can also witness, says the comment, reader of this diary, the extraordinary change which takes place in him as he discovers Latin America. It is just 10 months. He has been there in Latin America from one place to another only for 10 months. And when you read the diary, you realize that this is what he is writing in the beginning and this is what he is writing at the end, which means that in those 10 months he has been tremendously changed. Can that happen in somebody's life at the age of 21, 22? It's very rare, but this person is so alert, he is so sensitive, he is so thinking, he is so evolving that in 10 months he would learn what people might not learn even in 10 years. So it's that kind of mental quality that this person has. So gets right to its very heart, to the heart of Latin America. What is the heart of Latin America? The heart is, they are very simple people. They are people who have not been exposed to any kind of culture. It's not Western world at all. There's not much of education there. There are no jobs there, and but people are very good because they live in the lap of nature. They live in the natural surroundings where all of them have to support one another so that they can survive there. So it gets right to its very heart and develops a growing sense of a Latin American identity. I'll maybe touch upon this topic slightly separately also towards the end of this discussion. But then there is a kind of identity of Latin America. Identity, the features that tell you that this is Latin America. and this is so different from other places. That is what identity is, which makes him a precursor of the new history of America. That history of America that is being written in the 20th century, that history finally is going to change. Today we have Latin America, which is surprisingly modern. Argentina is not the same Argentina that it was, in the early part of the 20th century, and Cuba has been a country of a different kind today. So you have education, you have people who are on a mission, you have people who write quite a lot. In fact, in this series, World Literature series, we have already discussed 6 authors or texts, and in that text you can see that if you compare those texts with the text elsewhere of the same period, then they are miles away from and ahead of the writing in America, in England, in Germany, in France, and in the rest of the world. So it's a different kind of writing. It's this sudden upsurge, in Latin American writing, and that is because of this identity that I am talking about. Whose comments are these that I read to you? These comments are of the daughter of Che Guevara. She, was one of the 4 children that he had with his wife. Her name is Elida, and she might have married a person called March. So she Elida March, and she edited this book from where I'm taking it, the comment, and this is what the diary tells us. This diary actually is an account of the evolution of Che Guevara as a young man. A man who doesn't know much at the age of 20, and a young man who has known a lot at the age of 22 or so. So this is the point that I make, and then I go to 1 or 2 important examples. I believe that okay. So then I'll before I go further into it, let me introduce to you, which will be then also taken up in the second part of the lecture. Let me introduce to you the importance of memoir in literature. It's a kind of a memoir. The person went there. It's a kind of a travelogue. Travelogue means that there is a discussion about places that you have traveled to, and memoir is that you just also write about the memory, and you write at the same time or later, and there is a long tradition of memoirs and autobiographies in Latin American writing. So why should we read memoirs? Viewers, one should think about this question. Somebody went somewhere, he felt this, and he wrote this, and he was confined to the descriptions because of the place that he visited. If that is the case, why should I be interested as a writer, as a reader? I am interested in literature because literature tells me about fantasies, literature tells me about the feelings and emotions of people imagined. But here there is no imagined person, there is a real person. And the real person is moving around and talking about real characters in history. So will memoirs be a part of history or a part of literature? The question is good to discuss. In fact, you would know in answer, this is what I can say, you would know that there are writers who write autobiographies. There are writers who write memoirs, and those memoirs are very enlightening, are very educative. They enrich our understanding of life. They give us sets of values which stand us in good stead. So all these things have to be kept in mind while discussing a memoir. In fact, I would prefer memoirs to certain fantasies in writing. In fantasies, one sometimes goes anarchic. One starts bringing in lots of things that are not directly connected with the theme that one has in mind. But when it is a memoir, then you are conditioned, you are confined to, you are restricted by the requirements of the place that you are visiting, the people you are seeing, the problems you are facing. So all these things make it very authentic. And since memoir also mixes the account with feelings, you write because you feel about it. You might be angry with something, you might be happy with something. So happiness and anger, these are the feelings that you associate with your direct experience, and then you put that into practice on the paper in the form of writing. Therefore, memoir, I believe, are literature, and they tell us certain central things, as in the previous comment the writer says that they take you to the heart of the problem. So I would say that memoirs have to be understood as much as literature, as history, and even as thought, because after all history, literature and thought cannot be entirely separated from one another. So I believe that this question will be taken up further in the diaries, and we will also have certain examples of certain excerpts from the diaries. We'll be reading here, and I'll be discussing them at the level of language, at the level of authenticity, at the level of quality, at the level of appeal, and then we'll have a good idea also about the general Latin American writing that was done in the 20th century. This is the end, and the second part we will discuss.
Thank you, sir. Dear friends, in this part we have discussed about the life and about the basic nature of Che Guevara. In the coming part we will be discussing about the memoirs and the travelogues in aspect of Latin American writing. So this is a time for break. We will be joining you after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, friends. We'll be continuing with the topic, the Motorcycle Diaries. So please continue.
Thank you and welcome back, viewers. We were discussing whether memoirs can be considered literature towards the end of the first session, and the tentative answer was that memoirs are written in language, memoirs are written about certain issues of life, memoirs are actually experiences of the past, and the people go back and visit their past again and again to take lessons from there, to tell the reader that this thing is worth sharing. And then, in the light of those experiences, one of course understands one's present and plans one's future. So this kind of writing is, I think, immensely helpful even for the reader. It appeals to the reader to be face to face with a writer who uses his memory to communicate his intentions. So this is what memoirs are, and they are very close to autobiography, because in autobiography also the writer is talking about oneself or one's experiences, but that is sometimes chronological, and the writer is conscious that he has to share certain things with others. In memoirs, it is closer to the reality, and the writer is not talking to others, the writer is talking to himself. So that's the difference that is there between autobiography and memoirs. In memoirs, actually you are traveling through memory from one point to the other point, and then you are sharing not details. In memoirs, you are basically sharing your experiences, your feelings, your emotions. So I would consider memoirs very close even to poetry, and in terms of literary form, because when you go into your memory, then you become very creative. Then you are in a way combining the present with the past. This is what you are, this is what I am today, and this is what I was at that time. And one has to then explain to oneself and to others as to what happened in the meantime. That at the age of 21, one is like this, at the age of 35, one is like that. And then the writer who is at 35, generally I am saying, goes back to that point. This memoir is not of that kind. This memoir actually is a direct confrontation with reality. He is not writing for waiting after 10 years. He is not writing later about the past. He is writing about the present. He goes from one country to another. He is riding a motorcycle. He is talking to his friend who is keeping him company. He is talking to his dog, who sometimes is very sad. Sometimes the dog that doesn't entertain the kind of things that the Che is doing. So the god is angry. The dog is angry. So if that thing happens, then the writer immediately has to give the response, and the response can be called a memoir, can be called something else. So actually, as far as the form is concerned, the book is not called memoir; it is called diary. So he is keeping a diary, and diary is on a daily basis. So that way, there is a kind of mix-up, in the forms of this kind. And these are new forms. People keep diaries; they call them journals also. When you are keeping a diary, then you are keeping a journal. And there are writers, whose journals are published today. And in those journals, sometimes the moment is captured much more precisely than it could be captured in a poem or in a fictional piece. So anyway, this is the kind of thing that will continue in the middle of the discussion. But at the moment, my job in this particular part is to give you a feeling of the feel of the writing that is there in the diaries. So I was struck by, when I was reading this book, I was struck by his concern with nature, his response to nature, and in nature, particularly to the sea. And we in India are not, we are landlocked. We have only on one side the sea, but the rest of it is mountains and all those things. So we cannot see the sea as a character. But in Argentina, in Cuba, and although other places, you can see the Atlantic from certain corners, and Atlantic is a presence as if of a human being. It's not just water, because the water has so much gone into the making of the life conditions. Therefore, people talk to the sea, people talk to the water, they talk to the waves, and they understand the anger, the emotions of the waves, as if the sea was a human being. So I'm just taking that example for your consideration, viewers. This is what Che says at one place about the sea. The full moon is silhouetted against the sea, smothering in the waves with silver reflections. Sitting on a dune, we watch the continuous ebb and flow, each with our distinct thoughts. For me, the sea has always been a confidant, a friend, that is, a close friend, a friend absorbing all it is told and never revealing those secrets. Is he talking about a friend or talking about the sea? One wonders. Always giving the best advice. How does one feel that water of the sea gives you advice? Perhaps when you look at the water, when you look at the sea, when I see this set of waves in front of me, then I enter my own head at a different level. I start thinking. Maybe I am thinking of not just water, but of certain fluid situations in life. So a kind of poetic mood is created by the presence of the sea in front of me, in the front, in your front, in front of you. And he calls it absorbing all it is told and never revealing those secrets, always giving the best advice, whose meaningful noises can be interpreted any way you choose. What does he mean? Does he mean that the sea gives you all the freedom to do what you want to, the thing that you can choose, that it anyway liberates you from the pressures of life on the land? On the land you have schools, colleges, you have shops, you have markets, you have other things to do, and you have relationships. But when you are face to face with sea, then all that disappears, and anyway you realize that life is gone and this life is in front of you. So there is a kind of sense of freedom that one feels, and Che Guevara, when he is face to face with Atlantic, then he is saying these things. So imagine I'll just use the certain words to explain things further. Smothering the waves with silver reflections. The moon is there, and in the moon the water looks white, and the waves are smothered, and smothered by the light. They are disturbed by the light, they are crushed by the light, they are suppressed by the light. And reflections are silver reflections. When it's reflection, then it's light, but there is also a kind of mirror there, where reflections are there in the mirror. So has the writer not turned poet here? That is talking about waves as if he is looking some reflections there, and reflections maybe of the person who is watching the movement of the sea. All these things are so very well mixed and in a kind of combination that one realizes that actually sea is a kind of presence, and he is talking for me. So see the personal element that is there in the diaries. He has a diary in front, he is writing, and then he talks his own personal experience. The sea has always been a confidant. So what does a confidant do? You sit next to him or her, and then you just reveal your thoughts to your friend, and you tell your secrets to the confidant. So which means that you can tell all your secrets to the sea. You may not tell any secrets to your colleague, you may not tell any of your secret to your spouse, to your family member, but when you are face to face with the sea, then in fact you become free and you start exchanging views and even sharing secrets. And as I earlier said, that it is giving the best advice. The advice, and what is the advice of the sea? Think about it. The advice of the sea is, you can be angry, but finally you have to be calm. You have to go on. You can't sit idle even for a single moment. You are a living person. These are the advice. These are the sets of advice that sea gives. So in a way, sea is a friend and a confidant. You can. What do you say about this, Dr. Seema? This kind of interpretation of the sea?
So this is very relevant because sea has both tides and both calm waves. So this reflects life, I guess, and there are moments when you have to act according to sea. You have to be at ups and downs, and after a time being, when the time passes, the tough time passes, I would say, then you have to act like a calm person and you have to move on with your past and your tough times.
Have you gone to the sea sometime?
Yeah, I have seen.
How much time did you spend in front of the sea?
That was, I can say that no time is, you should bind in limits, because it's a huge overwhelming experience to be with sea and to just talk to yourself, to introspect yourself, because that is you have a vast sea in front of you, then you can go through, you can introspect yourself, your perceptions and your thoughts, and that gives you enough time to just go through yourself, and that gives you an ample opportunity to analyze yourself, your thoughts.
And when you've gone through those processes and you come back, then you're a changed person?
Obviously, sir. Obviously.
Then you will behave differently than before?
Obviously, that makes a man or a human being much mature to handle the situation much maturely and to give a different outlook that helps to see the things in a very different manner and different way.
So the sea gives you maturity?
Obviously.
The sea is a teacher?
Yes, sea is a friend, a teacher, a guide, I may say that.
Well, you are already, I think,
yes, I am inspired.
Influenced
yes,
by the views that Jay has expressed here.
Yes.
Now, I continue with the sea description, not the same description, but on some other day. And let's see what Jay says about the sea on another occasion. He says, I remember the day my friend the sea came to my defense. The sea has become protector. He came to his defense. Taking me from the limbo I was cursed with. The beach was deserted and a cold onshore wind was blowing. Okay? My head rested in the lap, tying me to this land. Lulled by everything around. The entire universe drifted past rhythmically, obeying the impulses of my inner voice. Suddenly, a stronger gust of wind brought a different sea voice, and I lifted my head in surprise. Yet it seemed to be nothing, a false alarm. Now, the way I would interpret the sea in this capturing of the moment is that the writer is going through, as Dr. Seema also pointed out, many phases one has passed through, one has seen in one's life, and that there is a kind of a rhythm there, and that rhythm is not generally there in life in the form in which it has to be there to make the person calm. Obeying the impulses of my inner voice. Obeying the impulses. This is totally different from, obeying the dictates of others. Most of us are bound by conventions, and Che is a person who will never be bound by conventions. Even if he marries, he doesn't have time for his wife. His wife has no time for him because he's going outside all the time, and he's a great lover. He loves his wife, he loves his friends so much, so intensely that one cannot really explain, in detail. So that kind of a lover of human beings, lover of his friends, lover of animals, lover of nature, lover of the sea, for instance. These things, show much more about the inner voice of the man. And he's talking about the inner voice. I have not seen many political leaders, talk about the inner voice, and particularly in this context. They might have an inner voice, they might be sharing them also, but then the kind of inner voice which tells me about myself, and I learn from it, and then I don't share it, but I educate myself in this manner. Only poets do it. So I believe that even though Che Guevara is a political leader, is a romantic hero of the 20th century, this person is also a poet. This person also plays with language, plays with metaphors, plays with images. See, the image is changing from one to the other. The image of the friend, the image of lying in the lap of somebody, being lulled by this, pulled out of the limbo and into the alert world. All these signs, all these images are actually active images, and they give us the pictures of relationships that we want to have with others. Those relationships are not possible in the actual real world, but they are possible in the realm of imagination. So we imagine, that there is a friend next to me, that there is a friend, who is touching on my head, that there is a friend who is taking care of my interests, who is protecting me when somebody else is attacking me. All these things are not there in life. They might be there potentially, but not actually. But when you are imagining these things in the company of the sea, in the world of imagination, then one realizes that one has this inner voice, and the inner voice also is the impulsive voice. Now, what is impulsive voice and what is rational voice? Once again, there is a philosophical question and there is an actual question. The impulse says one thing, the rational says another. Is there any morality in impulse? No. There is no morality in impulse. Is morality wrong or right? Everybody will say morality is right, which means that impulse is not right. But this person is talking about the impulse also. Why does impulse actually raise head? Does it not have a real basis? Ask Freud. He will tell it has a real basis. It is there in life. So it's not a religious question. It's not a moral question. The impulse is an actual question. I have an impulse, and that impulse is mixed with my voice, and that is what Che Guevara is saying here. He's making, he's raising profound points about human existence, about human experience, about human imagination. So obeying the impulses of my inner voice, and suddenly a stronger gust of wind brought a different sea voice. So when the wind changes, then the sea also changes. So as if the person has forgot completely about Cuba, forgot completely about Colombia, about Chile, and that he is at the moment caught in the middle of a vortex that is in front of him. And then I lifted my head in surprise, yet it seemed to be nothing, a false alarm, because finally he wakes up. So was waking up or was being asleep a reality? What kind of reality? I believe, and I believe on the basis of what I read in Che Guevara, I believe that both are right. That when you wake up, then there is one kind of reality. When you are asleep, then there is another kind of reality. You cannot say that is unreal and this is real. So that kind of absence of difference that he is emphasizing here is the crux of the matter. And let me remind you, friends, he is just 22, 23 years at the time. So at that young age, our people are friends who are in, young friends who are doing their BA and MA. It is that level. And if Che Guevara at that point of time is trying to understand Latin America from this angle, then you can imagine what wonders he will perform when he grows up, when he goes around and influences the minds and hearts of people. So Motorcycle Diaries have this kind of wealth of experience, this kind of wealth of perceptions. And it's our job, to read such literature, and such literature is not easily available in the rest of the world. There might be one or two examples elsewhere also, where this kind of self-examination and this kind of light of fancy is visible. But so far as Latin American writing is concerned, it is there all across. In fact, in the other lectures that we have organized, we have used this word magic realism. So there is realism, but magic is not real at all. But this person, the writers in Latin America, they would say realism also is magic. Realism is not simply real. There is something that can't be explained. There are connections, that cannot be, reasonably established. So if that is the case, that magic is there in life. That magic is there in reality. This word actually came from the Latin American writing. There are great Latin American writers, and they have got Nobel Prize, many of them from Latin America in the 20th century. And these people say that in life there is magic, and that magic is to be captured through the realistic description. And they gave this new term to us, and you can see that magic happening in the case of these diaries also, which are written not by a writer, by a professional writer, but by a person who behaves like a writer, who feels like a writer. Now I can also raise this question in the general context. How many cultural leaders, how many reformers, how many teachers, how many doctors write poetry or understand and enjoy poetry? Do you have any idea, Dr. Seema?
Sir, actually, I guess this depends on person to person. If you have an interest, you see. You have a different eye for nature, you have a different eye for emotions, you have a different feel for feelings. You see the people, if somebody's sorrows affect you, if somebody's happiness affects you, then I guess you develop a conscious to write something in a poetic way.
Don't you think that everybody is a poet?
Yes, everybody is a poet, is just to feel that urge to write, to just bring out those feelings into words.
No, somebody may not be using words, but one can be a poet.
Yes, one can be
in one's mind.
Yes.
Isn't our dadi, our grandmother, our mother, our children, aren't they poets?
They were. Those lullabies and those lories, we can say, they were their poetic sides.
which means that potentially all human beings are poets.
Yes, potentially everybody is a poet himself.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
And,
sir.
and that potentiality is realized in some cases.
Yes.
Here the writer, who was actually a political leader, this person sat back and went around and saw things, and he was excited and he started writing these things,
Yes.
which are very close to poetry.
Yes. So
This
that's
is-
how you termed magic realism. That's how his words created magic.
And
Yes,
here it is just a descriptive word, but you know there are writers in Latin America called Marquez, we have discussed them. They write magic realism novels.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
for instance, they are talking about the 20th century scene, and suddenly they go back to a myth somewhere else, and then they bring that myth here, and the
Yeah.
myth is actually there in front of us,
Yes.
which we can't see, but the writer says, I can see this myth here.
Yes.
So that kind of Latin American writing has this particular peculiarity, this kind of feature, that it generally demolishes the walls of reason
yes.
in our minds, and it tells us to think of the opposite.
Yes,
So
sir.
so we have to we can see the seeds of Latin American identity in such writing as this. This is where the people who read him, people who talk to him, people who hear about him, this is how they feel. So it is not peculiar to his country. It is peculiar actually to the entire region, the entire
Yes.
continent that is Latin America. So Latin America is actually Latin Americas, and the binding thread of Latin Americas is this kind of magic, this kind of genuineness, openness. The person is absolutely fearless.
Yes.
He is not bothered as to what his mother would say, what his teacher would say, what his friends would say when he is writing all this, because he feels that this is what should be written. So the writer has that kind of dignity, that the writer wants to say fearlessly what he or she feels like doing. In fact, when we were discussing other authors in the 20th century Latin American writing, then we went about women's fantasies, and women generally don't reveal their inner thoughts to people. But when you write, and when you belong to Latin America, then you don't bother. Then you write what you feel, what you have seen. So we had those stories, in one or two of our lectures, and you saw, that creates a different kind of audience, different kind of set of writers there. And I can tell you here, on the basis of what I have said already, that the seeds of that kind of fearlessness, that kind of anger, that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of excitement are there in this writer, and he is merely writing diaries. Now, after discussing, after having a view of his writing with respect to the sea, I'll take you to certain opinions that are expressed about Che by, for instance, the newspapers, by other scholars. Like one newspaper called Impact says this about Che. It says, Che writes with wit and skill. Wit means that you play with words, and skill, giving insights into the world that shaped his beliefs. This is a big praise. Our beliefs are not with us. They have been shaped by the world in which we live. We don't generally say this. We say that traditionally we have been handed down to this. No. When you have a belief system, that belief system has been shaped by your surroundings. The kind of circumstances in which you were born, the kind of family you were born, the kind of relationship in which you found yourself, or you found others around you into. So all these things shape your belief systems. The reader can see him, that is Che Guevara, piecing together the ideas that will shape his political future. So he's a young man of 21, 22, but you can now visualize him, that this person will live only for a short time. He will challenge the world. He will disturb this world. He will disturb the equanimity of this world. He will destabilize this world in order to see things afresh. This is the kind of impact that this person left on his audience through his actions, through his policies, through his statements, and you can see the seeds of all that in this writing that he has done at the age of 21. Now there is another comment from a critic called Cinto Whittier, and he says, becoming a myth, a symbol of so many scattered and fiercely held hopes. See, already the language is becoming very excited. Fiercely held hopes. What does it convey? You hold hopes. I hold hopes, no doubt, but fiercely. Why fiercely? Because I know that somebody is going to attack my hopes, and I have to keep them very close to my heart. Presupposes that such a character possesses a kind of gravity, a certain solemnity. This writer cannot be taken non-seriously. You cannot laugh at him. He is a very intense man, and in his diaries that intensity is showing. So it is a grave kind of a writing. It is a solemn kind of a writing. A writing you have to close your attention. You have to close your eyes from all sides so that you can focus upon what this man is saying. It is good that this is so. Historic utopia needs faces to embody it. How do we understand utopia? There are two ways. One way is that you read a book about utopia, you see the ideas. The other is you look around the world and you'll find many people who are holding that utopia in their head. So you can see those faces. So one way is to read a book, the other way is to meet a person and meet anybody, and these people with hopes. There are people who are in the worst of circumstances, when they are very poor, when they have no help at all from anywhere, and they don't commit suicide. They don't kill themselves. They say, tomorrow will be better. So when you say tomorrow is going to be better, as some writers created characters after this. There is a person in Dickens in the 19th century who always says tomorrow is going to be better. So, and this person is very poor. So this kind of a thing, that there are faces of utopia with us. You see a face and you see utopia, the dream, that is. But we should lose sight of the everyday nature of those human beings who were children, teenagers and young people before they acquired skills by which to guide us. So you see a young man and then you see the other person, and then this is how this person appeals. Now finally, viewers, I would say that Che Guevara's diaries tell us about his mind, about the seeds that are there in him, and that they also enlighten us about the world in which he lived. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash, for spellbounding us with the writings of Che Guevara. Friends, I hope this lecture must have added to your knowledge for English literature. We'll be serving you with such informational and valuable lectures with CEC live lecture sessions. So stay tuned with us. Thank you.